Hey y'all, welcome back. I have decided that I'm going to split up the video that I made for the Ready to Renovate Virtual Summit. It's really lengthy, about 40 minutes, and I feel like a lot of people come to my page with one specific question on water damage, and I think it's going to make it easier for those of you who are looking for specific areas of water damage to kind of navigate where that's at. This video is going to be specifically for wall repair. So if you've got any type of water damage to your wall, this is going to be a great video to watch. Make sure to like and subscribe for more, and y'all send me a message if you have specific questions related to your camper. Hope you enjoy. Now, I've tried to simplify this in the best way possible, so I broke water damage repairs down into 6 categories. So these principles will be used for all types of repairs, and they're really the core of all water damage repair. I'll go into each one of these in more detail, but the 6 R's of water damage include resealing your camper, removing the damaged wood, reframing, reconfiguring your electrical, R13, which is a type of insulation, and then replace, which is adding new paneling or OSB. Now, before you think about starting on repairs, you need to make sure that the leak has stopped and there's no more water intrusion. So you need to locate where the water is coming in and then reseal that area. Common places for leaks are windows, exterior lights, and basically all corners and edges of the camper. As you can see in this picture, the water was coming in from the roof in this little gap right there and was leaking all the way down into the ceiling and created a pretty nice soft spot in the ceiling that I had to replace. So that's all it takes is one small gap to have some pretty extensive damage. Now next, you're going to want to remove any rotten wood or insulation. Make sure to take a picture of your framing so you can have an idea of how it all goes back together. A multi-tool is really great for cutting in tight spaces where you're kind of trimming off the rotten wood of your framing. And it's going to help you control your cuts and not dig into the aluminum or fiberglass siding. You'll also want to clean up your studs, trusses, or joists by removing any nails, staples, or glue from your frame. Now, after all of your damaged wood and framing is removed, you're going to want to rebuild your frame. I usually like to work piece by piece until all the framing is repaired. Definitely refer back to that picture that you took of your framing so you can have an idea of how it all goes back together. So basically, I measured the dimensions of my original framing and ripped down 2x4s to that same size to rebuild it. I use overlapping and stagger joints to join the new wood into the existing framing. I'll go into more detail about what I call a buddy joint in a few minutes, so definitely keep that in the back of your mind. Now, if you're repairing frame damage, most likely you will have to reroute and reconfigure your electrical wires. So campers have a 12 volt and 120 volt system. Basically, your 12 volt wires are going to be really small. Your 120 volt wires are going to be much larger. They're usually encased in white or yellow, as you can see in the picture. There's both in that picture, and the 120 volt will have 3 separate wires in them. There's going to be a black, a white, and then there's a copper for the ground. So you'll be able to tell the difference if it's a 12 or 120 volt. Now, do your best not to cut the wires, especially if it's 120 volt. Try to feed them back through the wall or the floor or wherever if possible, and then reroute them to where they need to go. But if you have to cut them, I highly recommend that you learn how to solder. I do have a video on my YouTube about how to solder wires back together, but there's lots of good videos all over YouTube about soldering wires. And my main reasoning for that is you don't want to have to be digging through your wall or your ceiling or your floors because your wire nut came off and your wires aren't connected anymore and something's not working. So if it's going in anything that I'm not going to be able to get to easily, always solder it. Now, always feed your electrical through the framing. Never add paneling or floor or ceiling directly on top of electrical wires because then you run the risk of pinching it, and then you're definitely going to have some electrical issues after that. Now, I like to use R13 insulation. It is inexpensive and it works really well. So floors and ceilings will use a full roll of insulation, and for the walls, you'll need to tear the thickness in half. So your last step is going to be to replace. You're going to add a new piece of paneling or OSB over the framing that you just repaired. Basically measure and draw out your piece, cut it, test fit it, and then use construction adhesive and to glue the wood onto the frame, and then you can use staples or screws to secure it. Now, this is very important. If you don't listen to anything else in this entire presentation, listen to this slide. So first, you're going to make sure that your camper is unplugged and your battery is disconnected. You can even go as far as flipping your breakers off just to be safe. My reasoning for that is because you don't want to electrocute yourself, because chances are you will be dealing with electricity, your wires, all that fun stuff. So unplug your camper, don't electrocute yourself. Next, always try to work in 4x8 sections, always. So campers are built using 4x8 sheets, and it's a lot easier to replace the whole panel than it is to cut small sections out and try to repair it that way. It's also going to make your camper look like there was never any water damage at all if you repair it based on the dimensions that the manufacturer built on. Last, always split the framing when repairing water damage. Well, what does that mean? Let me show you a few examples. So let's look at a wall first. You can see the highlighted areas where the studs are, which are evenly spaced 4 feet apart. When you go to reinstall a new panel, the edge of one side will be nailed to the right half of the stud, where my white arrow is, while the other side of the panel will be nailed to the left side of this other stud, which is the other white arrow. Okay, so next I will walk you through the steps to repairing your walls, and I have some really good videos on this too. So some basic materials needed for wall repair include 1/8 inch paneling, a half sheet of R13 insulation, construction adhesive, and staples. I chose the 1/8 inch paneling instead of the 5mm underlayment because the 1/8 inch is basically the thickness that is originally in campers. It's how they build it. So it creates a smooth seam when joining your new piece and your existing piece of paneling. Now, the exception to the rule for these supplies is if you have an aluminum frame. Now, I am specifically talking about water damage for wood frames. So if you have an aluminum frame, these supplies will not work nearly as well for you. I have actually never worked on a camper with an aluminum frame. I have not gotten that lucky. But if you have questions on, how to fasten your paneling to an aluminum frame, I'd be happy to do some research and see what I can find as far as staples or what other people have used in order to, kind of attach your paneling to the frame that you have. Now, I'll start by removing the damaged panel. Notice I removed the whole 4-foot section. So after that, I'll remove all of the staples and any of the glue that are on the studs. I didn't have any frame damage in this camper, so I skipped the framing and insulation step. Next, I measured and cut out my wall panel. Make sure to measure out for any outlets as well, because you'll need to position those correctly. I use my circular saw and a saw guide to get nice straight edges. After that, I test fit my panel, and if I'm happy with it, I use construction adhesive and my staple gun to secure it to the studs. It's always a good idea to mark your studs as well if you don't know where they are. That way you'll have a nice vantage point from A to B where you can kind of draw a chalk line and know where to put your staples in. Now there's another clip that's about to come up, and I included this in case you have water damage where you have a window. So basically all of the process is going to be the same. The one difference is I do not cut out the part where the window is, as you can see. So I'm stapling it in right there, and then I actually, I get my router with a flush trim bit set at the right depth, and then I'll stick my router in the window and I will router out the edge of the window. Makes a perfect cut every time, way easier than try to like eyeball it or anything else like that. You see how easily the router just cuts it out, and then I just go back and put some staples around the edges and call it a day. So if you don't have a router or a flush trim bit, I highly suggest looking into getting those because they are great tools when renovating campers. I use my router a lot with, water damage repair, like a lot. Now let's talk a little bit more about framing in the walls. It's the same principle as framing on the floor. So the picture to the left, the area highlighted in yellow is what I replaced. I basically replaced the entire stud going vertically and the piece going horizontally. So I used pocket holes to screw the top and bottom into the existing framing and then added the support in the middle to stabilize it. Now the picture on the right shows a camper that I worked on with pretty extensive water damage. I ended up reframing the entire left side of that wall, but if you look where the arrows are pointed, it didn't need a full replacement, so I cut the damaged wood out with my multi-tool, went a little bit past what I thought was rotten, and added a new piece in with some pocket holes, and then added that buddy joint, which consisted of screwing a long piece of wood into the existing stud and the new stud.